Imagine a world where people no longer think for themselves. A world where every idea is borrowed, every opinion is copied, every belief is inherited from others. Over 100 years ago, the great writer Leo Tolstoy saw this coming. In his final work, which he considered his most important, A Calendar of Wisdom, he wrote, "Those who do not think independently live under the influence of another person. To always live according to the ideas of others is the worst slavery imaginable, worse than physical slavery." Tolstoy spent the last 8 years of his life distilling wisdom from over 300 of history's greatest authors. He knew that a great battle was taking place, not a war fought with weapons, but a war for the soul of humanity. Today, when the world is flooded with information, when every second we're bombarded by millions of data streams, the question arises, are we living in the worst era of intellectual slavery? If this message touches your heart, share it. Not because it might go viral, but because truth needs to spread. And remember, the quiet revolution for freedom of thought begins with one person, with you. Tolstoy saw what we're only beginning to understand today. He wrote, "The difference between physical poison and spiritual poison is this. Physical poison tastes bad, but spiritual poison, in the form of bad newspapers or bad books, often appears attractive to us. Replace bad newspapers with TikTok, Facebook feeds, or YouTube shorts, and you'll see that Tolstoy prophesied our era with stunning accuracy. The most harmful things for our minds are often the most attractive. But the problem doesn't stop with media. Tolstoy criticized the education system of his time. He saw that schools were creating people who only knew how to memorize and repeat the thoughts of others, instead of developing independent thinking abilities. Even more frightening, Tolstoy warned, the development of science does not necessarily improve our moral development. Science can make great progress in studying the material world. But in learning about the inner spiritual world, science is not only unnecessary, but it leads you to make wrong decisions. In Tolstoy's time, people had the illusion that science was all-powerful, capable of solving every problem, including spiritual and moral ones. Sound familiar? Today we believe that AI, big data, and technology will solve everything. But Tolstoy foresaw this. The most powerful tools can become the most subtle chains if we don't know how to use them wisely. Tolstoy identified a phenomenon he called collective madness, when an entire society makes the same mistake and takes pride in it. He wrote, "A sin remains a sin, even if many people commit that sin and are proud of it." He was describing a situation where the entire society is insane, and in such a society, the one who remains sane is seen as crazy. Sound familiar? In our era of cancel culture and echo chambers, anyone who dares to have a different opinion is often seen as an enemy of the collective. Tolstoy defined the essence of intellectual slavery. Living according to others' ideas is the worst slavery imaginable. He emphasized, do what you think is right, and don't rely on others' standards. But what's the sad reality? According to researchers who study Tolstoy, few people think independently. Most of our thoughts are borrowed from others from some external source. Particularly, Tolstoy recognized a dangerous phenomenon: when form overwhelms content. He observed, religion often focuses too much on form and forgets content. And when form overwhelms content, that's a sign of decay. It's fertile ground for superstition and fanaticism to flourish. Today, we see this everywhere. Likes, shares, followers become more important than actual content. Appearance matters more than substance. Metrics matter more than meaning. Tolstoy warned, blind faith easily becomes superstition and fanaticism. And we're witnessing this in our era of fake news and viral misinformation. To understand why we easily become slaves to thought, Tolstoy looked at human nature itself. His life was living proof of this conflict, a long chain of struggles between the demands of the body and the soul. He discovered a dangerous law: There is an inverse relationship between bodily desires and spiritual growth. Those who indulge the body too much will neglect the spiritual part. In this age of dopamine addiction, when we constantly seek instant gratification from social media, shopping, entertainment, we're feeding the lower part of our nature and forgetting the higher part. But the problem goes deeper. Tolstoy distinguished between two selves. In each person there are two selves, the false self and the true self. Most of us only know our false self. Therefore, Tolstoy says we don't really know ourselves. This is the painful paradox of the information age. We know too much about things outside and around us, but ourselves, that's what we know least about. We're like icebergs. The conscious part is just the small portion above water, while the vast unconscious part lies deep below, unknown to us. Even worse, Tolstoy had a sharp observation about humanity. Humans have the potential to become higher than animals, but in reality, most of humanity still lives primarily by instinct. No creature is more insane than humans, openly killing each other in the name of the highest ideals. And he pointed out an important difference. Confidence is a characteristic of animals, while humility is a characteristic of humans. But look around us today. Social media is full of overconfident people, showing off with very little genuine humility. We're living like confident animals, not humble humans. Tolstoy didn't just identify the problem. He also analyzed the specific systems that create intellectual slavery. What's amazing is that he did this over 100 years ago, but everything he said applies frighteningly well to our era. First, he struggled against the religious system of his time. His words were considered a great offense to the Orthodox Church. Of course, the Church couldn't accept such a rebellious believer. But Tolstoy wasn't fighting against Jesus Christ. He only opposed the churches, believing they had gone against Christ's teachings. He saw that many religious teachers, many masters forbid and don't allow disciples to question their faith. Sound familiar? Today, how many gurus, influencers, or experts forbid us from questioning what they teach? They say, "Don't think too much. Just believe and follow." Second, Tolstoy saw the problem of violence and political systems. He wrote an extremely profound sentence. Not only Christ, but all the wise men in the world, from Buddhism, Brahmanism, Taoism, and the ancient Greek philosophers, all taught that intelligent people should respond to evil with good. But instead, what do we have? A vicious cycle of violence. Every act of violence not only doesn't soothe us, but brings increasingly more violence into our lives. Tolstoy identified the root cause of social decay. Why do most religions decay, and why does morality decline? There's only one reason: because people believe in a life based on violence. And this doesn't just apply to physical violence. In the digital age, we have mental violence, cancel culture, cyberbullying, public shaming, all based on the logic of violence, using force to silence others. Third, Tolstoy sharply criticized the fake intellectual class. He spoke of scholars who only knew how to memorize and repeat others' thoughts, lacking creativity, proud of their knowledge. He quoted Georg C. Lichtenberg, "Academic life, education, and science can become like leaves on the tree of your life, while still bearing no fruit." Tolstoy distinguished between two types of knowledge: knowledge that helps us succeed, and knowledge that helps us become human. Only the latter has real value for spiritual life. Today, we see this everywhere. People with high degrees, many followers, big platforms, but no real wisdom. They're just information, reproduction machines, not independent thinkers. But Tolstoy didn't just identify the problem. He also provided a path to liberation. This is the most important part: how to escape intellectual slavery. First, we must find our true self. Tolstoy quoted Socrates, "Know thyself." But he went deeper. Not just knowing the conscious part, but also the deep unconscious within. He asked, how can we be truly happy if we don't first know ourselves? And he described a beautiful image. Deep within you is a spring of goodness. It's like a well that flows better when you keep it clean and dig deeper. This isn't empty talk. It's practical guidance. Instead of seeking validation from outside, find strength from within. Second, live according to your own will, not the crowd's. Tolstoy always emphasized each person's independence in thought and action. He advised, do what you think is right, and don't rely on others' standards. And he pointed out the real source of strength. Our inner conscience holds more meaning than the external judgments of the world, because we will live with our conscience forever, throughout eternity. Peer pressure, social pressure, cancel culture, all are temporary, but your conscience will stay with you forever. Third, balance self-love and self-improvement. Tolstoy had a very deep insight. Loving yourself is a necessary aspect of a good life. It's a very strong feeling in your childhood, but it may weaken as you get older. But at the same time, he also advised about self-improvement. When you feel unhappy, think about all the bad things you've done. This might make you feel more uncomfortable, but it might force you to improve yourself. This isn't masochism. This is honesty. Facing the darkness within honestly so you can change. Finally, live simply and respect real work. Tolstoy said, I respect business people more than those who call themselves scholars. He lived by the principle, the less familiar with something, the less difficulty to endure. And he warned about greed. Our body's desires are like small children. They always want more. The more you surrender, the more they demand from you. Sound familiar? This is exactly the algorithm of tech companies today, creating addiction loops so we always want more. Now comes the most important part: how to practice these ideas in daily life. Tolstoy didn't just provide theory, but also specific techniques for freeing the mind. First, control emotions and reactions. Tolstoy had an extremely simple but effective technique. When you're angry, count from 1 to 10 before doing or saying anything. If you're still angry, count to 100. Why does this work? Because the time spent counting is the gap where consciousness can intervene to guide action in time. In our era of react culture, when everyone responds instantly to everything on social media, this technique becomes invaluable. Create a gap between stimulus and response. Tolstoy also spoke of a higher challenge. One of the most precious things a person can do in this world is to experience anger without expressing it outward. This isn't suppression. This is mastery. Fully experiencing emotion without letting it control your actions. Second, practice proper listening and observation. Tolstoy understood that we must listen impartially, without any prejudice. What's the problem? We rarely hear what's being said, but only hear the noise of our own hearts. In our age of information overload, when everyone is preparing responses instead of truly listening, this skill becomes extremely rare and valuable. Tolstoy also taught us to distinguish between judgment and discernment. Judgment is to place oneself above others. Discernment is using a clear mind to perceive reality. Third, learn to seek truth through suffering. This is Tolstoy's deepest insight. Suffering and misfortune also have their positive aspects. When we're sick, we see that health is precious. Moreover, suffering and misfortune can help us understand life more deeply, help us develop our spiritual life. But there's an important condition. Suffering only has a positive impact on strong souls. Tolstoy's own life proves this. From the pain in A Confession, when he nearly committed suicide due to life's meaninglessness crisis, to the deep wisdom in A Calendar of Wisdom when he was 80. Suffering doesn't automatically create wisdom, but if you have the courage to face it instead of escaping, it can become your greatest teacher. Finally, live in the present, and accept. Tolstoy emphasized the importance of the present moment. He taught us, we can change our lives by changing how we view life. He gave the example of a glass of water. Two people both drink half a glass. One says half full and rejoices. The other says half empty and regrets. Same reality, but different perspective, completely different experience. And he reminded us about humility. The distance from humanity to perfection is equal for everyone, because we're all equally far from the ideal of perfection. We've journeyed from recognizing the problem to understanding the solution. Now it's time to face the ultimate truth Tolstoy wanted to convey. Real revolution begins from within. Tolstoy had a core principle. To reform society, you must first reform yourself. To reform yourself, you must improve your inner self. This sounds like Confucius. Cultivate yourself, regulate your family, govern the state, bring peace to the world. To bring peace to the world, you must first cultivate yourself. Tolstoy concluded, the only true path to improving society is improving your spiritual self. This isn't escapism or individualism. This is understanding that you can't give what you don't have. You can't spread peace if you don't have inner peace. You can't fight ignorance if you're still ignorant about yourself. Second, commitment to endless truth-seeking. Tolstoy greatly valued the search for truth. Tolstoy's saying is very true. If we stop seeking truth, while we haven't found it yet. He distinguished between two types of truth: specific relative truth and ultimate absolute truth. And he taught us humility. The more we know, the more we see ourselves as small in the vast ocean of human knowledge. In an era where everyone pretends to be experts about everything on social media, this attitude becomes revolutionary. Third, courage to overcome fear and prejudice. Tolstoy warned, those who are ashamed of what they should not be ashamed of step onto the path headed for destruction. There are things we need to dare to be ashamed of, and things we shouldn't be ashamed of, but society tells us we should be. Tolstoy's own experience. He struggled very hard to break free from others' opinions, from education, religious teachings, and the life concepts of his contemporaries. This is the hardest battle, fighting against a lifetime's conditioning. Finally, a call for a new era. Tolstoy offered a message of hope. When you progress in your spiritual life, you'll see some negative things in yourself that you didn't recognize before. This doesn't mean you're worse than before, but means you're getting better while improving yourself. This is the paradox of growth. The more you grow, the more you realize you have to learn. The wiser you become, the more you understand your ignorance. A Calendar of Wisdom by Tolstoy, after over 100 years, remains a source of inspiration and comfort, helping readers in their life and work. Why? Because truth doesn't become outdated. Human nature doesn't change. The struggles Tolstoy described are still our struggles today. But now, with more powerful tools and platforms than ever, the battle for human consciousness has become more intense. This is my invitation to you. Join the quiet revolution of those who refuse to be slaves to thought. Not a revolution with weapons, but a revolution with wisdom. Not a revolution with violence, but a revolution with inner transformation. Not a revolution to defeat enemies, but a revolution to free minds. Leo Tolstoy opened the path. Now it's time for us to follow. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the first step to escape intellectual slavery is recognizing that you might be a slave. But once you see the chains, you can break them. Once you understand the game, you can stop playing. Once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. Welcome to the quiet revolution,